People learned to dread the sound, a low, buzzing drone, growing louder as it approached, an ugly mechanical growl in the sky above the city. As long as you could hear it, you were safe, for the sound meant the machine was still flying, still passing overhead, on its way to somewhere else. But the moment the buzzing stopped, the moment the engine cut out, and the sky fell silent, that was when the terror truly began. Because when the sound stopped, it meant the machine was falling, diving toward the ground, and in a matter of seconds it would strike and explode. People would freeze at that sudden silence, listening, praying, counting the seconds, hoping the thing would fall somewhere else, on somebody else. This is the true story of the buzzing terror weapon that fell from the sky, one of the first of a fearsome new kind of weapon. This is a story about a revolutionary weapon and the terror it inflicted, about one of the first flying bombs and its brief but frightening reign. It is a story about the psychology of terror, about how a weapon could inflict fear as well as physical harm, and about the resilience of those who endured it. And it is a story grounded in the documented historical record, the true account of a weapon that pointed toward the future of warfare. A reference is provided in the description so you can verify these facts for yourself. To understand this weapon and the terror it inflicted, you have to understand what it was and the circumstances of its creation. By the middle of the war, the tide had turned against Germany, and the country faced mounting pressure on all fronts. Its cities were being bombed, its armies pushed back, its situation growing increasingly desperate. In this context, Germany turned to new weapons, weapons it called its vengeance weapons, designed to strike back at its enemies and, above all, to terrorize their civilian populations. These weapons were intended to inflict terror, to undermine morale, to make the enemy's people suffer in retaliation for the bombing of German cities. And the first of these vengeance weapons to be deployed was the buzzing flying bomb. The flying bomb was a revolutionary weapon, one of the first of its kind, an unmanned flying machine that carried an explosive warhead to its target. It was, in effect, an early version of what we would now call a cruise missile, a small pilotless aircraft that flew to its target under its own power and then crashed down to explode. This was a genuinely novel weapon, a departure from the manned bombers that had previously carried out air attacks. Instead of a crude aircraft dropping bombs, here was an unmanned machine that was itself the bomb, flying to its target and destroying itself and its surroundings in a single blast. It represented a new concept in warfare, a glimpse of the automated weapons of the future. The most distinctive feature of the flying bomb, and the source of its terrifying nicknames, was the sound of its engine. The weapon was powered by a simple type of jet engine that produced a distinctive buzzing or droning sound as it flew, a loud, ugly, pulsing noise. This sound, unlike anything people had heard before, gave the weapon its nicknames, names that captured the buzzing, droning quality of its passage through the sky. To the people who lived under its threat, this sound became the harbinger of terror, the signal that one of the flying bombs was approaching. The very sound of the weapon, so distinctive and so ominous, became central to the terror it inflicted. Now this account is grounded in the documented historical record, one of the notable weapon stories of the war. What follows is drawn from that record. The core is thoroughly documented. Germany did indeed deploy a revolutionary flying bomb, an early cruise missile powered by a jet engine that produced a distinctive buzzing sound, launching thousands of them against enemy cities in a campaign of terror bombing. The details are recounted to convey the nature of the weapon and the terror it inflicted, as well as the efforts to counter it. The way the flying bomb worked was ingenious in its simplicity. It was launched from a ramp, catapulted into the air, and then flew under the power of its jet engine toward its target. It was guided by a simple automatic system that kept it flying in the right direction, at the right altitude, toward the general area of its target. But the flying bomb had no way of precisely aiming at a specific point. Instead, it was equipped with a mechanism that measured the distance it had flown. A small device on the front of the weapon counted its progress, and when it had traveled a preset distance, calculated to bring it to the target area, the mechanism would trigger. At that point, the engine would cut out, and the weapon would enter a dive, falling toward the ground below, to explode. It was this mechanism, the cutting out of the engine and the subsequent dive, that produced the weapon's most terrifying characteristic. As long as the engine was running, the weapon was still flying, and the buzzing sound continued. But when the engine cut out and the weapon began its dive, the buzzing suddenly stopped. This sudden silence was the signal that the weapon was falling, that it would strike and explode in a matter of seconds. The people below, hearing the buzzing stop, knew that the weapon was coming down somewhere nearby, and they had only seconds to take cover and no way of knowing exactly where it would fall. This moment of silence, this terrible pause between the cutting out of the engine and the explosion, was the essence of the weapon's psychological terror. The flying bomb was launched in large numbers, primarily against a great enemy city, in a sustained campaign of terror bombing. Launched from sites across the water, catapulted into the sky, and sent droning toward the city, the flying bombs came in a steady stream, at times many in a single day. The campaign began not long after a great turning point in the war, and it subjected the city and its people to a prolonged ordeal of bombardment. The flying bombs fell across the city, striking without precise aim, their explosions causing death and destruction wherever they came down. For the people of the city, it was a time of great fear and suffering as the buzzing weapons rained down upon them day after day. The flying bomb was a weapon of terror precisely because it was so indiscriminate. Lacking any means of precise aim, it could not be directed at specific military targets. Instead, it fell more or less at random across the target area, striking homes, streets, and public places, wherever it happened to come down. This indiscriminate quality made it a weapon aimed essentially at the civilian population, at the city and its people as a whole, rather than at any specific military objective. It was, in its very nature, a weapon designed to spread terror among civilians, to make them suffer and to undermine their morale, striking randomly and without warning across the areas where they lived. The impact of the flying bomb campaign was significant, causing many deaths and injuries and inflicting great suffering. The flying bombs killed thousands of people and injured many more, their explosions bringing death and destruction to the city. Beyond the physical toll, the campaign inflicted a heavy psychological burden, the constant threat of the buzzing weapons, the terror of the sudden silence, the fear that gripped the population. So great was the threat that large numbers of people, particularly children and families, were evacuated from the city to escape the danger. A great exodus driven by the flying bombs. The weapon had achieved its purpose of spreading terror, subjecting the population to a prolonged ordeal of fear and suffering. Yet the people endured, and efforts were made to counter the flying bomb and to defend against it. The threat of the flying bomb spurred the development of defenses designed to shoot down or otherwise stop the weapons before they could reach their target. A layered defense was organized, combining several different methods to intercept the flying bombs. Barrage balloons were deployed, their cables intended to snare the low-flying weapons. Anti-aircraft guns were massed to shoot them down, and fast fighter aircraft were assigned to intercept them, to catch the flying bombs in the air and destroy them before they reached the city. Together, these defenses formed a determined effort to counter the threat of the buzzing weapons. The fighter pilots who intercepted the flying bombs faced a challenging task, for the weapons were fast and small, difficult to catch and destroy. The pilots had to match the speed of the flying bombs, often diving on them from above to gain the necessary velocity, and then attack them, firing at them to destroy them. This was dangerous work, for a flying bomb that exploded when hit at close range could endanger the attacking aircraft. Some pilots even developed a remarkable technique of flying alongside a flying bomb and using their aircraft's wing to tip the weapon's wing, upsetting its guidance and causing it to crash harmlessly. Through such skill and daring, the fighter pilots destroyed many of the flying bombs, protecting the city from their deadly cargo. The defenses against the flying bomb grew steadily more effective, particularly as new technology was brought to bear. The combination of improved radar, which could track the incoming weapons, and a new type of shell that exploded automatically when it came near its target, dramatically increased the effectiveness of the anti-aircraft guns. As these improvements took hold, the guns began to shoot down a large proportion of the flying bombs, greatly reducing the number that reached the city. The layered defense, combining balloons, guns, and fighters, and enhanced by the new technology, grew increasingly successful at stopping the flying bombs, blunting the terror they inflicted. The flying bomb campaign against the city was eventually brought to an end, largely through the advance of Allied ground forces. As the Allied armies advanced, they overran the sites from which the flying bombs were launched, depriving the enemy of the means to continue the campaign from those locations. Though the enemy attempted to continue the attacks by other means, launching the weapons from aircraft or shifting their aim to other targets, the main campaign against the city was effectively ended by the loss of the launch sites. The prolonged ordeal of the buzzing weapons came to a close. The terror lifted as the launch sites fell to the advancing armies. Despite the terror it inflicted, the flying bomb did not achieve the strategic results that its creators had hoped for. It did not break the morale of the enemy population, nor did it turn the tide of the war. The people endured the ordeal, their morale unbroken, and the war continued on its course toward the defeat of Germany. The flying bomb, for all the terror and suffering it caused, proved unable to change the outcome of the conflict. It was a fearsome weapon, but not a decisive one. Its impact on the war's outcome far less than its creators had envisioned. The resilience of the population and the effectiveness of the defenses had blunted the weapon's strategic impact. What does the story of the flying bomb reveal about warfare and the nature of terror weapons? First and foremost, it demonstrates the limits of terror as a weapon of war, the way that attempts to break an enemy's morale through terror often fail. The flying bomb was designed to terrorize the enemy's population and to break their will, but it did not succeed. The people endured, their morale unbroken, their determination, if anything, strengthened by the ordeal. This illustrates a recurring lesson of war, that terror bombing of civilian populations, however much suffering it inflicts, often fails to break morale and may even strengthen the resolve of those it targets. The flying bomb is a striking example of the limits of terror as a weapon. The story also illustrates the psychological dimension of warfare, the way that a weapon can inflict fear as well as physical harm. The flying bomb was terrifying, not only because of the destruction it caused, but because of the psychological terror it inflicted, the dread of the buzzing sound, the horror of the sudden silence. This psychological dimension was central to the weapon's nature and to the experience of those who endured it. The story illustrates the importance of the psychological aspect of warfare, the way that a weapons affect not only the body, but the mind, and the significance of morale and psychological endurance in enduring the terrors of war. Consider, too, the resilience displayed by the population that endured the flying bomb campaign, their ability to withstand a prolonged ordeal of terror. Despite the fear and suffering, despite the constant threat of the buzzing weapons, the people endured, carrying on with their lives, maintaining their morale, refusing to be broken. This resilience, this capacity to endure and to carry on in the face of terror, is a testament to the strength of the human spirit. The story illustrates the remarkable resilience that people can display in the face of adversity, the ability to withstand even a prolonged campaign of terror without breaking, a resilience that ultimately defeated the weapon's purpose. There is a significant lesson here, too, about the role of technology and ingenuity in countering new threats. The flying bomb was a novel weapon, and countering it required the development of new defenses and the application of new technology. The layered defense, and especially the combination of improved radar and the new type of shell, illustrates the way that ingenuity and technology could be brought to bear to counter even a novel and frightening threat. The story illustrates the importance of adaptation and innovation in warfare, the way that new threats spur the development of new countermeasures, and the crucial role of technology in this ongoing contest. It is worth reflecting on the way that the flying bomb pointed toward the future of warfare, foreshadowing weapons that would become central to later conflicts. As one of the first cruise missiles, the flying bomb was a pioneering weapon, an early example of the unmanned, self-guided weapons that would proliferate in the decades to come. In this sense, the flying bomb was a glimpse of the future, a forerunner of the guided missiles and unmanned weapons that would transform warfare. Its legacy extended far beyond its own campaign, contributing to the development of weapons that would shape the conflicts of the future. The flying bomb was a weapon of the future, appearing before its time. It is also worth remembering the human cost behind the weapon itself, including the suffering of those forced to build it. The production of these weapons, like that of other German weapons of the period, relied in part on forced and slave labor, the exploitation of prisoners compelled to work under terrible conditions. This is a sobering aspect of the weapon's story, a reminder that behind the technology lay human suffering, that the weapon was built in part by people forced to labor against their will. The flying bomb story thus encompasses not only the terror it inflicted on its targets, but the suffering of those compelled to produce it, a fuller picture of the human cost of this weapon of war. The story of the buzzing flying bomb stands as a significant chapter in the history of the war, a testament to the terror of a novel weapon and the resilience of those who endured it. It demonstrates the limits of terror as a weapon of war, the psychological dimension of warfare, the resilience of the human spirit, and the role of ingenuity and technology in countering new threats. And it stands as a glimpse of the future of warfare, a pioneering weapon that foreshadowed the guided missiles and unmanned weapons of later conflicts, even as it inflicted terror and suffering in its own time. So remember the buzzing terror weapon that fell from the sky, the flying bomb that droned over the city with its ominous sound. Remember the terror of that sound and the even greater terror of the sudden silence when the engine cut out and the weapon began its fatal dive. Remember the indiscriminate nature of the weapon, falling at random across the city, and the suffering it inflicted on the population. Remember the defenses that rose to counter it, the balloons and guns and fighters, and the technology that made them effective. And remember the deeper truths the story reveals about the limits of terror as a weapon, about the psychological dimension of warfare, about the resilience of those who endured, and about how this pioneering weapon, for all the terror it inflicted, pointed toward the future of warfare, even as the people it targeted refused to be broken.